Hey there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Austin Tech Connect. This is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. And every week we try to bring interesting interviews with people here in our community who are doing cool things and making things happen in the world of tech. And today we are joined by Jake Moilanen. Hey, Jake, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Excited to be here.
So for those of you who don't know Jake, and you really should know Jake, he is the founder and CTO at Iron Light, and he is also the general partner of the Austin-focused part of the fund Seraph Group. And we're going to learn all about those things. But Jake, first of all, how long have you lived in Austin?
Geez, since 2001, so a little bit now. 20-some years.
Yeah, I was just going to say, they don't let those of us who came later, though, be natives. My kids will say to be a native Texan, you have to be birthed on the soil. So
I know I get corrected a lot. It's although the people that actually have been here for their whole lives, I call them unicorns because they're rare.
They are rare. They're getting more though, because the younger people who are in their mid 20s now have been able to go off to college and come back, because we now have this vibrant job community that wasn't here when I moved here 34 years ago. Most people, their kids graduated, went to college, and then had to go to Dallas, Houston, or somewhere else to find careers. Now they can come back and work in Austin. So the growth is good on that rate.
Yeah, Austin's growing up.
So let's go back in the Wayback Machine to college and then beyond. How did you get into this crazy world of tech and tech investing?
Oh, geez. So, I was always dabbling in computers from way when I was, 8 to 10 years old. So a long time ago. And I went to University of Michigan, grew up in Michigan, and just started as a psych major. And I was just minoring in computer science and realized computers are way more interesting. And so I decided to make the jump and got into computers and just hit, perfect timing to get into the .com. So I was graduating and then and pretty much started my career out in Silicon Valley during the .com at Sun Microsystems. And so that was a good education on what exuberance looks like. And even my early 20s, I realized this is not sustainable. And so that was kind of my first foray into tech.
Nice. And so then after sort of that .com boom days and all that, what brought you to Austin, and what did your career go from there?
Yeah, so I was I remember seeing just the exuberance and realized, man, I'm starting to see my friends get laid off. I'm starting to see offers rescinded. I'm like, I got to ride out this bust. And I got an offer at a few places, but one of them that was interesting was here in Austin at IBM. And I was getting to go work on their mainframes. So whenever IBM brought up a new mainframe, I was the one that got it to work for the first time. I was doing this on PowerPC, so super geeky stuff. So bit flipping to make these processors work. I was doing low-level kernel code, specifically on AIX and the Linux kernel. And so that brought me here to Austin. But it was interesting. They gave a lot of freedom to a kid so young. And I started working on these refrigerator-sized machines and getting them to work. And then we eventually started putting these big refrigerator-sized machines together to build supercomputers. And so I started getting these supercomputers to work for the first time. And one of the last ones I worked on was one called Mare Nostrum. It was based in Barcelona. I was over in Barcelona for about 8 months bringing this thing up. And ended up being the fastest computer in Europe, the 5th fastest in the world. And I'm probably 25, 26 at that time. More compute power at my fingertips than all of Africa combined. I'm thinking, man, when am I going to build this bigger than this? I'm peaking out in my mid-20s. This isn't great. And so I ultimately decided, okay, I gotta come up to do something else here. And so I ultimately decided to go back to business school. And I wanted to get into the startup world. And so I went to UT, their MBA program, and then graduated and went back out to Silicon Valley to do startups. And so it was quite a journey.
So, that's kind of actually a very interesting, eclectic background. That was one of the things when we talked before that, not only did I like you as a person, and we talked about family and life and things like that, but I was really impressed with your career, because not a lot of people go from like .coms to mainframes to supercomputers to MBA to startups the way you did, and then into an investing fund. You've kind of seen it all. I mean, for a guy so young, you've kind of seen it all from the standpoint of tech. What's been the most interesting changes you've seen since those early days of the .com through today in the changes that we're seeing in tech itself, not so much Austin?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so you've seen just, where the emphasis, is in the market. Initially, it was hardware way back in the day. And as that's becoming more commodity, you're starting to see things kind of move up the stack into software, into application software, and then into the web. And now you're starting to see things get even higher level into AI, and so you've seen this progression occur. And one of the challenges I always had, it was like, okay, I started flipping bits. It was low level assembly code, and then now I'm trying to wanted to get into the higher level work, and that was a tough transition. But if you understand how the lower levels work, it's easier to kind of go to the higher levels and kind of understand how it all works. And so I think this progression is going to keep happening. People are going to get more and more high level, and software has gone from this very bespoke type of work to almost like Lego pieces. And you can still, I still use AI to help write code every so often, but it's more or less pulling out like little snippets of code and kind of putting them together to build something larger. I think that progression, these Lego pieces are just going to build bigger and bigger as time goes on.
So I really like that example of pulling it together as Lego pieces. I mean, we all know that AI is doing a at least somewhat level of decent job in doing coding, but most of the coders I talk to, they say it's not there yet where they can just go, here, write this entire piece of software that's going to change the world. I have a young person in my life who's about 30 who does really important coding in the financial world. And he was kind of resistant to AI at first because he didn't trust it. It was writing long and complicated code. And, his company's really progressive. They've been paying attention to it. So now they use it. I go, what was the biggest change in you? And he said to me he goes, I manage new coders. I help train them. And he goes, so I treat AI as the most junior coder there is. So I have to review what it's doing. And he didn't say piece it together like Lego, but that's kind of what he was describing. And he said, or I treat it like the most advanced coder I've ever met, who is just out of this world skill-wise, who's on LSD. So either way, you actually have to kind of manage those Lego pieces. How long do you think that is sort of the way AI and coding is going to go versus when there's no job for coders anymore?
Yeah, it's going to be a progression. I mean, you're kind of seeing where a lot of the jobs you might send offshore are able to be done by AI agents at this point, and that's going to start getting more and more complex as time goes on. And I think it's who knows how long it'll take, but I do think that they'll be able to get more and more sophisticated. But really, where the challenge you start running into is just the integration work and start looking at the more complex interactions. I think there's going to be a long ways to go for computers to be able to handle something like that. And I even look at what we're doing now at Iron Light, and I know that there's just no way that anything AI related could possibly do something like that, because it has to combine both efficiency, speed, and starting to get down to like cache line bouncing, which just not something that computers are even remotely thinking about at this stage.
So, it's interesting because you talked about the level of stuff is a lot of stuff we currently can offshore, or really junior, just out of school coders. One of the stats that I've been seeing is that companies aren't hiring as many people either offshore or in entry-level jobs in the U.S. Won't that set us up for a problem down the line where you don't have those junior level people who get the skills to be the mid-level people and then the senior level people? If they're not starting somewhere and getting trained up and being mentored and along the way, are we setting ourselves up for problems 15, 20 years ago when we need those 35-year-olds who are at the next level?
Oh, I do think so. And you see this with some older, computer languages like Fortran. When you don't have the younger generation going and coding in Fortran anymore, at some points it's difficult to support that legacy type code. And we're going to see the same type of thing happening in the larger type of software development at some point. And I don't know what the solution is besides, hopefully people just really, really enjoy computers and want to code, which, that does happen. So hopefully they do it in spite of AI, not versus anything else.
Well, it is kind of one of those things because like right now it's really easy if you're, 35, 45, 55 years old to be like, but the thing we have to remember, I'm a lot older than you, as we start to get older, we die. And it's like, right now, I think in our country, we're lacking sort of this knowledge transfer that has always sort of taken place in large companies and in communities. And so, as you're talking about kind of what's going on, do you think that's true?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge risk, and there's I mean, this larger level issue, though, I think with LLMs, that they are starting to be trained by by other LLMs, and there's a real risk that the LLMs could also implode, and so we do need to have still have humans in the loop, and be able to know what they're doing, and so that's it's going to take a long time, but it is something that I think that we all have to be a little bit wary of.
So let's get back to your sort of your career path. So let's talk a little bit about the investing and side. What is Seraph Group, and how did you end up going from working in startups to that project?
Sure. Yeah. So after I went out to Silicon Valley to do startups, I started doing a few as just a contributor, and then I did a few as a founder. And I got lucky enough to build a few, sell off a few, and I got into a position where I was able to try looking at some invest in the investing world. And I started doing a lot of early stage investing, but I also spent a lot of time doing quant trading on the public markets. And I realized that I actually could start using some quant techniques from the public market and apply them over into the venture capital market. And I started just doing this by myself on my own, just my own investments. And I realized it worked pretty darn well. And so through all that, I got connected with Seraph Group, and they're looking to launch in Austin. And so they asked me to go if I'd be interested in launching a fund focused on just the Austin ecosystem. After doing a lot of diligence, I said yes, this would be something I'd be very interested in doing. And so I launched the Austin focused Seraph Group. And what ended up happening though is that I started gravitating more towards deep tech. And so a lot of the investments I was doing, I was more in the deep tech side. I realized I was acutely good at looking at some of the CTOs in the eye, and even though it might be not an industry I understood, but I can tell if they were full of it, or if this is actually real technology. and between the algorithm I wrote to help assess the chances of success, and also with looking at the technology, I was able to do a pretty decent job with the Seraph Austin's deep tech fund.
So it's interesting because at the Austin Tech Hall of Fame about a month ago, we do a first time founder award, and it went to the founder of Paradromics, and he gave a really compelling speech about deep tech and Austin, and there were a lot of people afterwards who came up to me and said, we never even heard of this company. We'd never heard of Matt. We never, we didn't know. And yet, for those listening who haven't heard, it's the most legit competitor to Elon Musk's Neuralink. And they're both based in Austin. And anytime you start to see, two major players based in a place, all of a sudden you're going to see more things happening in that place. And so Austin is really starting to have a lot more of this deep tech stuff. But like I said, people were coming up going, we had no idea. Can you talk to us a little bit about what is deep tech? Because honestly, even some people in the tech community surprisingly don't know that much.
Yeah, absolutely. So deep tech is really just hard technology that is difficult to recreate. So it's really, really good IP that requires a lot of actual just almost R&D type work to be able to make it work. And it's the challenge is it's not SaaS software, and so the business models are not defined. It's difficult to know if it's going to work. So think of like a brain cancer treatment company. It's a very asymptotic type outcome. It's either a massive success or it's a failure. There's not a whole lot in between. And that's one of the fun things about deep tech is that you see lots of these types of companies and you're trying to assess, okay, is this technology, for one, is it going to work? And two, if it does work, is there going to be a marketplace for it? And three, which is actually the harder part, can this team go commercialize it and make it successful? And a lot of times what you see is that a company a founding team that is really good at building the technology is not good at actually building the company around it. And so we did a lot of medical device or FDA types of drugs, and we found that usually the team that was able to get it through FDA approval was not the same team that was going to be able to commercialize it. And so you almost started to say, okay, after FDA approval, we need to look for an exit, or else we need to invest after it's been FDA approved, and now we're trying to commercialize it.
So before we move on to Iron Light, is there anything else about Seraph Group that you want to share with everybody?
Oh, we are, I think, on fund 13 or 14 at this point. If anyone's looking to get more involved in deep tech, for sure reach out to me.
Nice. So You are the founder and CTO of Iron Light, and I know you can't talk too much about it, but let everybody know what Iron Light is. I love to hear what people's current hot projects are.
Sure, absolutely. So we are a fintech company. We're trying to bring tokenization to traditional finance. And when I say tokenization, just think of packaging a private market asset onto the blockchain. So it's not cryptocurrencies or NFTs. This is just a repackaging of almost a stock certificate in a digital form. Now, what it does, that allows us to go trade these tokens like a normal public equity. And so to the end user, it looks like you're just trading a normal Tesla share or normal IBM share. And so it's really, I think that's going to pave the way for people to get liquidity into the private market very, very effectively.
So, you mentioned blockchain. So 10 years ago, 8 years ago, that was the hottest thing. It was like the AI of today when it came to everything being talked about in tech. And of course, most people kind of associate blockchain with crypto. And crypto is part of blockchain, but blockchain has so many more things that it can do. Why do you think it sort of fell from the attention level of all of the press and everything else? Because there's still interesting things being built that are on blockchain, like your company and so many others that I talk to, but we don't hear it. I mean, there was a blockchain association 8 years ago. There was all these things, and it's not talked about as much anymore, but it's still one of those breakthrough technologies that are going to have a lot of impact on what we're doing, culturally and business-wise over the next couple of decades. Why is it taking a backseat in the press?
Well, you had like the FTXs of the world. There's lots of bad actors in the space. And so that was one of the challenges that we saw. And I remember I gave this talk, probably 2021 or 22. And it was, people were asking me, well, you're a deep tech investor. Why haven't you guys made any investments in anything blockchain related? I was like, well, you had the exuberance of 2001 combined with the leverage of 2008. This is not going to end well. Whatever, crashes after the crash and burn, whatever rises out of the ashes is going to be the next Amazon or Google of the world. And that's what I want to double down on. And then we started looking at it. This is before FTX happened. We realized that the killer app is going to be something in the real world asset space. If you look at say Bitcoin, what is the intrinsic value of that? It's like gold. There's no real way of saying that this is the actual true value of it. But if you look at say a real world asset, well, there's actual cash flows. You can model out what that value of that company is worth or that asset's worth. And if you tokenize that, well, there's actually a real value there. And I think the thing that's interesting about blockchain, and especially when it comes to the financial market on Wall Street, is that if you're trying to get everyone in all of Wall Street to agree on a standard or agree on have a centralized place where all this data is stored, would never happen. But blockchain has enough of a marketing push, enough interest that you can go get your chief compliance officer or get your CTO, get the larger executive board all on the same page that this is something we need to adopt. But once everyone does get onto this standard, now there's a bunch of huge benefits that you see as far as like transparency of what's actually occurring, and you see a massive cost reduction, which is where I think things get really interesting.
So it's interesting. You bring up sort of bad actors, right? And really in sort of both sides that you're talking about in the world of crypto, you talk about FTX and there's certainly some others. And we were talking about like biotech, medtech type stuff and deep tech. And then you have, Elizabeth Holmes and everything that went on sort of with that. How as we push as a society farther and farther and farther along, how do we avoid the fraudsters? How do we smoke them out?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing right now is that blockchain and crypto is growing up, and we're seeing regulators get involved. And actually, the new administration is actually really adopting this new technology and making it easier and working within the SEC to make sure this is actually safe and regulated. And so we get the best of both worlds. We get the regulations, which have a lot of investor protections, as well as the ability for to have the benefits of blockchain. And I think that's where things get really interesting.
Nice. Well, let's move over to Austin. You've been here 20 plus years. I've been here 30 plus years. The town has certainly changed in the last 2 and 3 decades. And certainly our tech community has grown up and changed and matured. So what do you think are some of the most interesting things about Austin over the last 20 years? What do you think we're doing right? And what do you think we need to do for our ecosystem, right? I don't think, and I know you agree, we don't have enough unicorns that really come from our startups to our growth companies and then poof, we don't seem to get enough of those. What are your views?
Yeah, I don't think Austin has enough unicorns. For us being one of the larger startup ecosystems in the US, we should have more unicorns than we do. And if you look at it, to get a company to the unicorn size and scale, the ecosystem needs a handful of things. It needs funding. It needs having the executive talent to get them from like a Series B to a unicorn stage. You need the culture of hard work, and you need mentorship. I think Austin has some of that, but there's still other areas that it has some ways to go. So look at funding. So if you look at history, we started in the 60s and 70s with a lot of semiconductor type companies. We had IBM, we had TI, we had Motorola, and those really helped seed the semiconductor industry. And then we had Dell and all the Dellionaires. They seeded all the enterprise space. And I remember early when I first got to Austin, all the startups were all enterprise type companies. You saw very few B2C type companies out there that were successful. And then you had the Trilogy Mafia, which, Josh Bear and, launched Capital Factory, and that's done a tremendous amount of value for all of Austin's ecosystem.
Yep, for sure.
Now, you go fast forward a little bit, you started seeing a lot of the Mag 7 come here. So you had Apple, you had Google, you had Facebook. They're opening up offices in Austin, which, on the surface sounds great. The challenge is that they were mostly sales and some operations. And they didn't have the early stage employees that have the capital to go seed that next round of innovation for the ecosystem. I also had like a Blake Chanley. There wasn't that many early employees that came to Austin. And in fact, if you wanted to advance your career, a lot of the times you had to go move back to Silicon Valley to get past middle management. There was definitely a ceiling. You just couldn't get any higher with a lot of these companies. Now, what's going to be interesting, though, is that you look at the next generation. We talked a little bit about some of the deep tech companies that Elon's bringing. So we have Tesla, we have the Boring Company, we have X, we have SpaceX, Neuralink, XAI. I think that's going to be kind of seed the next generation here in Austin. What's exciting for me as a deep tech investor, I think that they're going to also imprint some of their DNA onto our culture. I'm very excited to see that that I think Austin could be one of the deep tech kind of capitals of the United States because of it. And so, but the whole idea is that with these old companies kind of seeding the next generation, it's going to pave the way for those early investments in space and teach them how to actually go move forward in that type of industry. And one of the challenges I ran into when I was just doing Seraph Austin's Deep Tech Fund is that it's difficult to find enough investable companies to invest in Austin that were truly investment grade. And so sometimes I had to go outside of Austin or have just loose Austin connections in the fund. And so if I'm having a challenge at not a super large fund, to have the ecosystem to support a multi-stage fund to get to that can invest those later stages is very, very difficult. And I think it's one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing. How do you get a company from Series B to unicorn type status? And I think that's where we start really seeing the gap. Companies just have to sell too early in Austin today.
Well, and we have a history of companies, even if they get the Series B, C, they go public. We have a history of Austin of them getting bought by even bigger companies, right? So we have this thing
that's right.
We don't keep even our baby unicorns. We don't keep them as this large growth oriented thing because they get absorbed by one of the larger tech companies, and that's been going on for close to 30 years for a lot of our tech companies. You bring up a couple of interesting points when you went through sort of funding, executive talent, the culture of hard work and mentorship. All of those things are stuff that we talk about or try to talk about with the Austin Technology Council. The funding thing is an issue, certainly getting more later stage funding so that the companies can grow. But it is interesting because you talk about, sort of those companies that spun out investors and entrepreneurs. I do a speech called The History of Austin Tech, and I talk about the 10 pillars that made Austin great and able to do all this. And one of the pillars, I call it the Dell effect, but it's not just Dell. It's Dell, it's Trilogy, it's Tivoli, it's Rackspace, it's going back to IBM and others. The people who were there, they either made enough money to become investors or they were entrepreneurial enough and they were able to go out and start their own thing. Are we still, like, I just recently, we always talk about the trilogy people being everywhere, and we could rattle off, 20 leaders in our community who came from that. But I'm also noticing lately, I'm meeting a whole bunch of people who spent 5-10 years at Rackspace. So it's like, ooh, they're another one who is actually spinning out the next generation of leaders. Why are we not seeing more of that middle market talent being trained to go then run other companies? When I talk to the growth companies, to get that next level, they often have to hire from outside Austin. Why are we not training our own very well, except for a few examples?
Yeah, I think it's a huge issue. I think it's probably the largest issue that Austin's running into. We don't have enough executive talent to take it from a Series B to a late stage, type startup. And a lot of that comes into that, the Mag 7, if you're at a Silicon Valley type company and you open up an office here in Austin, you can't get to, there's a ceiling on how high you can go up. And so you have to leave Austin to further your career. So Austin doesn't have that, enough of an ecosystem there. So just not enough, late stage type executives. Additionally, we just don't have the mentorship that is required to teach people to get that next level. I think the Austin tech scene could really take a page of how CPG has done it in Austin. So look at our original OG, CPG, which is Tito and Tito's Beverage, launching the Tito's here. He worked with Clayton Christopher and Sweet Leaf and Deep Eddy, and that's done had a huge effect on the CPG market within Austin. Clayton launched Cavu, which seeded a lot of early stage CPG type companies. And then you start seeing like Tito and Clayton have both mentored some of the next generation, like Lalo, Jim and David both have got a ton of mentorship from those two guys. So I think the tech scene needs to do that. The challenge we're running into right now is that, there's not a lot of mentors out there. I look at some of my old Austin heroes, Sam Decker, Brett Hurt, Ross Berdorf. We need that next generation of talent that's going to be able to teach the younger guys how to go do this. And I think that's one of the things that Austin really needs to go do. And one of the original charms of Austin is that you could go to any random meetup and run into a startup leader. You don't see that as much anymore these days. And I think that's something we need to change.
You're preaching to the choir, because if I have a message, that is probably my biggest message that I bring up a lot, is if you go back in time 20 years and you talk to now people, and they'll say it was, we could rattle off the names: George Kosmetsky, Laura Kilcrease, Pike Powers, Carol Thompson. Everybody we're inducting into the Austin Tech Hall of Fame now are citing the people who opened up doors for them. And those people who are inducted are the names that the current day people are citing. But why aren't we seeing that next generation? I talked to someone who said that, back in the day when you were about 35, 40 years old and you started to get successful, Pike Powers or Carol Thompson or Bill Cunningham, somebody would tap you on the shoulder and say, you're starting to make a name for yourself, or congratulations on your company being so successful. How are you giving back to Austin? Who are you mentoring? It happened to me, and I wasn't even in that class of leader. How come that's not happening now?
It's a great question. I think one of the challenges is maybe Austin's getting larger. It's not, it's a little bit tougher to realistically to see them, frankly, because there's a very, very tight knit community. So you would see them at every event because there wasn't that many events.
All you had to do back in the 90s was show up at the Four Seasons bar, and you would see 50% of the people you wanted to see in Austin Tech at 5:30 to 7 every day having a Jack Daniels.
They're accessible, and that's the big thing. You could pretty much walk up to any any of your heroes, and they would help you out. And I think Austin was always very, very helpful. That was one of the things that really early in my career I was always very impressed, is that you could go. People always want to be helpful to helping your career, and I think what Austin needs now is for people to be helpful, but also open doors outside of Austin. Austin stays within its ecosystem almost too much when it comes to the startup community. We need to also expand outside of Austin and make connections and do partnerships with companies that are on the East Coast or on the West Coast. And we need people to open up the Rolodexes to do that more.
Well, one of the things that I've thought of is in the early days, and I was here watching it. I wasn't in the middle of it, but I was watching it. In the early days, you did have sort of, and I don't mean mentorship, but you sort of did have, when we started to bubble up, Silicon Valley, New York, people, they were coming to town. They were kind of boosting Austin before we became this thing that the press wants to put us in competition with the Valley. There was sort of this, you remember we used to have the airplane, they called it the Nerdbird, that went twice a day. The American Airlines flight was direct to San Jose, and it was full every single day, both ways. And in the last 10 years, the American canceled that flight because it wasn't quite the same thing. I wonder why aren't our entrepreneurs trying to do that with Pittsburgh and Nashville and Phoenix and these other cities that have legit traction? They look at Austin as, we want to do what Austin did, but Austin kind of shuts them off, like, oh, go away, kid, you bother me. And I wonder if there's something we could do to help the next generation of tech city.
Oh, absolutely. I think, you look at where the ecosystems are being started outside of Austin. We need to be working with them as well. I mean, there's so much talent. When I was first raising for a Seraph group, one of the things that I always said is like, okay, what we're going to do is I'm going to invest at the seed and Series A type rounds for this company. And then when they have to get to the Series B and they're going to leave Austin, and we're going to do this little arbitrage where the valuations jump when they go over to Silicon Valley. And so we did a pure valuation arbitrage, and that really helped a lot. But I think we need to do the reverse a little bit now. There's lots of other ecosystems out there that just don't have the funding, and we can go help them get funded, and then hopefully bring them to Austin as well.
Yeah,
and that cross-pollination will go a long way.
So what can we do as leaders in the community to start the spark for some of this? Because I don't think that ball is rolling. And, you have to get a little momentum to get things happen. What can we do?
Well, I think a lot of it is it's offering mentorship, getting out there into a lot of these meetup groups or these events that you don't normally go to, and not be in our bubble. There's a lot of really good groups out there, but they kind of stay with like YPO or post-founder exit groups. But they kind of see within those little bubbles. We also need to go out, and talk to the ones that haven't exited quite yet, and we need to open our doors and mentor. I think if I was going to ask anyone in Austin anything, it's like go be helpful to the next generation and teach them how to be successful.
Yeah, and I think that was our secret sauce that set us apart from all the other cities in the 90s and 2000s and 2010s. Was the fact that was what it was. I mean, you talk to anybody who came here in that time, and they talk about how they met one of these names that we've said, and they opened up their Rolodex, and they introduced them to 10 people. They told them what boards to get on, what organizations to sponsor. And, now people come to town, and they're not even looking at how do I grow my network when they get to town, much less having anyone sort of guiding them through that.
Oh, absolutely.
So, well, anything else that you want to add? I mean, we've got a captive audience for a couple more seconds. Any other advice to Austin?
This might be a little controversial, but I think one thing that I think we didn't talk about enough, and I think is going to be interesting to see how this changes. But one also major difference I saw between Silicon Valley and Austin was just the culture around hard work and really work-life balance. And and that's one of the things I think we also need to work on a little bit. And where when I was in Silicon Valley, the average workday ended at 8 or 9 p.m. and I was back in the office early in the morning. We don't see that as much in Austin. I think that's one thing that I think that we need to embrace a bit more is just the longer hours. We don't need to do this all. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But we also need to embrace the little bit harder work than we're doing right now.
Do you think that's a generational thing?
Even the older generation, I don't think I ever really saw it to the same degree as Silicon Valley. So I think it's a little bit of a cultural issue. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how Elon's impact happens, in Austin, and see if all of his cohort of companies start rubbing off on what the culture looks like here. But I think that's going to be what I'm kind of looking for as well.
Well, thank you so much, Jake. This was a great conversation. It's right along the way that I founded this podcast to do, introduce people to somebody they may not know and get some advice from someone who's sitting in a really good viewpoint chair. And so thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. If somebody wants to follow up with you, they're like, I don't know Jake, but I got to know Jake. How do they find you?
LinkedIn's probably best.
Nice. All right. We will have that in the show notes with his name and his LinkedIn connection and all that. Thank you so much for everybody who tuned in. I say it every single time. If it wasn't for the audience, why would we do this podcast? Austin Tech Connect is starting to grow again. We grew, then we kind of leveled off. We grew. And all of a sudden, the last few episodes, maybe it's because I've had great people like Jake and others, but we're starting to see a little bit of an uptick. So make sure you're telling everyone in your tech ecosystem, hey, this podcast, it's not bad. And if you know somebody who should be a guest on Austin Tech Connect, reach out to me because I'd love to have more people who are really making waves here in Austin. So thank you very much, and we'll see you back here next week on Austin Tech Connect.